everyone. This is Karen from the Peace Discipline channel, where you can learn all about nonviolent discipline. Today's video is part of a series on what not to do in discipline, and we will be looking at physical punishment, or what is also known as corporal punishment. This video will be relevant to parents as well as to teachers, and rather than looking at all the ways children are physically punished, the focus of this video will be on alternatives to corporal punishment. In other words, I'll be giving some suggestions of what we can do instead. First of all, just to be clear on what corporal punishment is any kind of physical punishment, anything that inflicts pain or discomfort on a child intentionally in order to punish them. This may include hitting, slapping, beating or smacking your child. It may also include things like kicking them, burning them, pulling hair. Some of the things on this list may more obviously look like child abuse. All of these are in fact a form of child abuse. I heard one parent complaining about how resistant and uncooperative a child was while they were holding the child over a sink and forcing soap into their mouths. In the parent's mind, this was to teach them not to swear or to be rude. When I hear that situation, I'm not thinking that the problem is how uncooperative the child was. Holding a child roughly over the sink and forcing soap into their mouth is a form of physical assault. Ask yourself how you would respond to this if another adult ever tried to do that to you. So even though things like putting chilies or Tabasco sauce in a child's mouth, or washing their mouths out with soap, or hitting them with a wooden spoon may be incredibly common in our society, these things are forms of assault and should definitely be classed as abuse. In my years as a school counselor, I saw children with bruises, with broken bones, burns, injuries inflicted on them by the very people who were supposed to keep them safe. And this is terrible. One of the things I found most worrying was not the physical injury that these children suffered. It was the internalizing effects that were happening. Children learning to lie about the things they've done because they're not safe to tell you the truth. Children learning to edit and not share things with their parents because they know how the parent will react. Children internalizing and beating themselves up, developing symptoms of depression or anxiety. And for me, also something so worrying, just the normalization of violence. If we want to live in a less violent society, we need to do something different with our children, because as long as we punish them physically, we normalize physical assault. We normalize bullying, we normalize coercion, we normalize violence. Parents and teachers may use physical punishment, thinking that they're gaining something, that they're gaining cooperation, or that they're gaining a sense of control over the child. Do we think about what we lose? Children need to feel safe with us. And when we take away their sense of safety with the most important people in their lives, we are doing them serious harm. As I said, this video is not aimed at looking at all the different kinds of physical punishment or all the negative effects, and there are many negative effects. So let's look at some of the situations where people justify using physical punishment. Look at some of the things that we can do instead. I'm not going to cover every single alternative here because actually there really are many alternatives. And since there are other videos, I'm going to stick with just a few examples today. Let's start with that example I used about swearing. Do we need to wash their mouths out with soap? Absolutely not. That is a form of assault, obviously. And we don't want to normalize that, and we don't want our children to feel unsafe with us. We don't want them to feel violated by the very people they need to turn to if they're ever in danger. So what can we do about swearing? A skill we found really useful was to tell our children that if they wanted to swear, they should ask us for permission to say a bad word. And if we said no, they had to keep the bad word in. But if we said yes, they were allowed to use the bad word. Probably useful to say that once they'd shared the word with us, they had to put it away again until the next time that they asked permission. This turned out to be brilliant. First of all, our children were quite prepared to use this alternative we gave them. You will find this with children. When you give them a do instead of a don't, if you say, do ask me like this, instead of don't swear, often very prepared to cooperate, especially when you start using a skill like that when they're little. Our children were very young, 3 or 4, when they heard their first swear words at school and started to want to experiment with these. And we simply asked them to ask us first. And we had some very entertaining conversations around this. Child would come and say, "Can I say a bad word?" And I might say, "Well, just wait a little. I don't want your younger brother to hear." A little bit later, I might say, "Okay, now you can tell me your bad word." And they'd say something they heard at school, and I'd be able to say, "Well, what do you think about that?" And we could have a discussion about it. It became such a useful opportunity for guidance about what words are used for what, and what is a nice way of saying something, and what is a disrespectful way of saying something. Had we just shut it down, we wouldn't have had all of those opportunities for guidance that came up when we gave them permission, but said they had to ask first. Now, of course, that might not work with all children. Another parent dealing with swearing was dealing with a very young child who couldn't understand a skill like that. In fact, he was still a baby. He'd learned the swear words from his older brother and his older brother's friends. And what this mom did was she ignored the swearing as if it was a nonsense word, as if it was just goo or gaga. She ignored the swearing, and she told other people in the family to ignore it too. So grandparents, visitors, anybody that came to the house was tipped off that they need to ignore swear words from the baby. What she was cleverly doing here was making swear words a lot less rewarding, because this baby had noticed at first that when they said the swear words, people had a big reaction. Oh! And that was kind of rewarding. It gave him a lot of attention. So this mom was cleverly taking away that attention and acting like that's not really a word worth saying. And that worked. He got the message after a while and focused on the words which were getting attention, which were the words which really meant something, like ball or hat or bucket, instead of the swear words he'd been using. Perhaps if you have older children, you might talk together as a family about how you want to work on swearing, and you might agree together on a plan of action, such as putting a jar on a table, and anybody who swears, including the parents, needs to put a rand in the jar every time they swear to make up for swearing. Perhaps there's even a reward that if anybody manages not to swear for the whole month, they get the jar of money, or perhaps the money is used towards some kind of treat for the family later on. There are other options, but what I'm saying here is we can be a lot more creative than doing something nasty to the child. In the bigger picture, we need to be replacing corporal punishment with better discipline generally. The basics, like listening to children effectively and understanding them better, like tuning to children so that we know why they're doing what they're doing and we can address that. Once we know why they're doing what they're doing, we can give them more guidance and instruction, paying attention to what the right thing to do would be rather than what they're doing wrong, what they need to do instead of what they need to not do. An example of that might be that instead of saying, "Don't hit your brother," you're saying, "Next time your brother gets in your space and looks like he's going to break something that you're trying to build, call me very quickly so I can help you." You can hold him on the shoulder like this so that he can't come any closer, and call me so that I can come and help you and take him out the way. When you say to children, "next time," or "here's what you need to do," often much more cooperative than when you're saying, "don't do this, don't do that," because they know what to do instead. If you have any doubt about this skill, think about the fact that I'm using it right now in this video. Instead of just saying, "don't hit, hitting is terrible," I'm saying, "here are some options for you to use instead." And this is very effective with children as well as adults. Other basics that we can use with children: having structure, having a child-centered routine, having rules, teaching children to take turns instead of fighting over something, giving a deadline as to when something should be done, such as, "I'm counting to 3 or I'm counting to 5. And that doesn't mean following the deadline with a smack. You could follow that deadline with a reward. You could follow that deadline with you stepping in because the child is clearly not managing. You could step in with some kind of support, or perhaps give them a timeout from the thing that they're not managing. So giving deadlines is part of structure, helping children to take turns, explaining to children what needs to happen, having rules, having policies at school. All of these things form part of a disciplined environment, which makes challenging behavior less likely to happen. so that we're not in that position where you might be feeling like hitting a child. If I can think of some other basics, something called time in other words, lots of good quality time with your child, time when you're connecting, time where there's cuddles and touch available, and praise and positive feedback. In the classroom, lots of fun time with the students where you're connecting with them. Praise is another of our good basic skills. Giving children positive feedback and working with their motivation rather than their fear. Encourage them rather than scare them into doing the right thing. We may also use something like a reward system, again, working with their motivation rather than their fear. So those are some of the basics that we might be using in the bigger picture to prevent situations where the child might do something challenging enough that you may want to hit them. Then we also need something that I call containing skills, skills to step in and contain behavior that's going out of control. I've done other videos on containing skills. A sense of containment is basically for the child to feel that if I do a wrong thing, you can stop me. And if there's a right thing that I need to do, you can get me to do that. So just in a nutshell, containing skills would be things like using a timeout or using a when-then statement. When you've done this thing that you don't really feel like doing, then you can do that thing that you want to do, like watch TV or play on the computer, or go outside or play with your friend. Another containing skill is to guide the child to make amends. Let's look at the kind of situations where parents justify using corporal punishment. One of the things you will hear parents say is that the child did something really bad. An alternative that we could be using in that situation would be, once everyone's cooled down, to guide the child to make amends for what they have done. In other words, give them the responsibility to put right and to guide them in doing so. Perhaps they would have to do some hard work to fix something or to pay for something or to do something nice for somebody who they have wronged. Guiding them in an appropriate apology would also be an important part of that skill. So restorative action is an important tool to be using when children have done something really bad, because really bad things don't happen in isolation. They happen in a context of relationship, and they actually hurt and inconvenience other people. So it's important for the child to learn about the consequences of their actions for other people and to be involved in doing something to put right. Another reason a parent or teacher might hit a child is that they might say, but the child was just really out of control. And by out of control, I mean that the child became aggressive, or they became very rude and disrespectful, or there was a certain behavior that they just wouldn't stop. It seemed out of control. What I would do there as an alternative to hitting is to observe and see what it is that the child is not managing, what it is specifically, and give them a timeout from the thing that they are not managing. So if what they're not managing is to treat people with respect, so perhaps they're being aggressive, you might give them what we call an exclusionary timeout, where they're on their own for a little while so that they can't hurt other people. Give them a chance to cool down in that way. If what they are not managing is rules in a particular area, might give them a timeout from being allowed to play in that area. So for instance, they might have to play inside because they're not managing the outside rules. If what they're not managing is their computer time or their time playing on their phone, then you might give them a timeout from the computer or a timeout from the phone or a timeout from screens generally, because there's something in that area that they're not managing. So what I'm suggesting here is much more attuned than the brute force and ignorance of just upping a child because they're doing something wrong. I'm asking you to look to see, why is a child doing that? What aren't they managing? What is the motivation underneath their behavior? And to address that specifically. And we've discussed in previous videos how when our responses really fit with our children's signals like that, it also has the effect that children feel more contained and safe with us, because we're responding in a way which fits with their signals. One of their signals may be misbehavior. We need to be able to respond in a way that's attuned to them in that. But just to get back to children who are acting in a way that seems out of control, One of the things that would be a real trigger point for parents in our society would be disrespect. Someone would say, but the child was just so rude. That might be a reason that they would cite for hitting the child or giving them a hiding or a beating. So what I would say about that is we do not have to tolerate disrespect, but that the best way to teach respect, first and foremost, is to show respect ourselves. So we need to be modeling respect by the way we treat other people. So they need to see us treating our partners and our friends and our own parents with respect. But also, children need to see that we can treat them with respect because they learn from us, they imitate us. So if we can speak to them without raising our voices in a calm and kind and respectful way, we are already going a long way towards teaching them respect. If, however, they are very rude and disrespectful to us, we do not have to put up with that. You can immediately give a timeout. Timeout right now. And one of the reasons why we give a timeout in that situation is because that situation is likely to escalate to a point where we ourselves feel really triggered. But one of the reasons I advocate for the use of timeouts and do not want to see timeout taken out the toolkit is because timeout is one of the skills that we can most directly replace hitting with. Those escalated situations, those situations where you really feel like hitting a child, are often heated situations, situations where the child is not thinking straight and maybe acting in all kinds of out of control and disrespectful ways. And to be honest, situations where we are not thinking straight because perhaps we are triggered, perhaps we are not really in touch with the thinking parts of our brains, situations which could very easily escalate to violence. And so a skill like timeout, where we remove the child to another venue or we remove ourselves. If the child won't go to timeout, don't worry. You take the timeout, step away for a bit. You don't have to fix everything in the moment. It's going to be better if you cool down first. So whether it's a child that needs a timeout or whether it's the parent that needs a timeout, I am fine with somebody even yelling, timeout, right now, rather than hitting a child. I think it's realistic that in that situation you may be upset, you may even shout it. Although it may be ideal to stay calm, if you're not calm, it's okay. Rather yell timeout than hurt your child physically. Put your child in a safe place for a few minutes while you cool down, or step out the room yourself if it's safe to do so, than get to a point where you're so angry that you lose it. And in a moment where you're unable to think and regulate yourself properly or control yourself in the way that you normally can, end up hurting your child. So you can hear that I am mentioning timeout quite a bit. If you look on the internet or in parenting books, you will see that timeout is a controversial skill, and I have a lot more to say about this, and I'm going to do videos specifically on timeout. In the meantime, if you're nervous about using timeout, you can find good solid advice and research on timeout on the Peace Discipline website at peacediscipline.com. Another reason I've heard from parents to try to justify hitting their children or hurting them is that the child did something very unsafe. So one mom said to me, for instance, well, if he runs towards the road, that's one situation where I will hit him because I won't let my child be run over by a car. Well, of course you don't want your child to be run over by a car, but hitting is not your only option. And actually, there's a much better way to manage that. If a young child runs towards the road, catch them and hold their hand for the duration of time that you're near the road. They might squirm and say, don't hold my hand. I don't want you to hold my hand, because they were having fun running around. And you might say, I'm sorry, you cannot run near the cars. I have to hold your hand. In effect, what you're doing there is you're giving them a timeout from running around freely because they showed you that they couldn't manage running around freely. So again, you're looking at what was the child not managing. They're not managing the safety rules by the side of the road. You're going to give them a timeout from playing freely and hold their hand near the road. After a while, they may be very prepared to cooperate because they want their freedom back. And you might say, all right, I'm going to give you a chance. And you walk next to me nicely and be safe. And they'll probably show you that they know how to be safe because they want to be a little bit more free. So you'll be the judge of whether they can manage that or not. And please don't let go of that hand if they can't manage. But what you see there is a child actually developing some self-discipline because they want that freedom. So that skill that you're using of giving them a timeout from the thing they're not managing is having a positive effect. It's not just hitting the child like hitting them. It's actually teaching them self-discipline, teaching them to rein themselves in a bit because they want their freedom back. And that's one of the benefits of using the timeout in this way, giving a timeout from the thing the child is not managing. The child will miss having the freedom to do that thing, and they will start to exercise self-discipline, reining themselves in so they can show you that they can manage with the freedom that you give them. I've certainly found that to be the case using this skill over the years with children at school, with children at home, that when children know that you're watching them and you are quite prepared to limit their freedom a bit, to give them a timeout from the thing they're not managing, they tend to want to show you that they can manage better. That's a positive effect. A lot of the things I've said could be useful for parents or teachers, but let's just think about teachers and why they might hit children. Now, hitting children is illegal in schools in our country. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Many, many children experience corporal punishment at school. If you were to ask teachers, why did you beat that child? They will say things like, that child is just so naughty. He doesn't listen unless he feels. So teachers, I'm going to give the example of that child in your class that disrupts your class every single day. There are other children that will respond to the basic discipline that is going on in the school and will mostly cooperate. But any teacher will tell you that in class there are usually a handful of children who do not respond in the normal way, who can make your teaching life a misery. They get out of their seat a lot, they disrupt class, they're impulsive, they don't wait their turn, they can be aggressive sometimes. And what I want to say here is that those children who are not responding like the others, those children who seem extra naughty, are actually the children we need to attune even more to. We need to understand them even better, because these are often children with different needs. For instance, that child that disrupts your class every day may be a child with ADHD. ADHD is a neurological condition which affects the executive functioning of the brain. Children with ADHD will often disrupt the class and make the teacher's life very difficult. What a child with ADHD is needing is not to be hit and hurt. This is a child with special needs. This is a child who needs more support to do what the other children can do naturally. So when we hit and hurt these children, we are failing them because we are not giving them the support they need to do better. If we look in the research, we see that these children respond differently to discipline and that there are certain skills which work very, very well with them. For example, children with ADHD respond differently to rewards, extra sensitive to rewards. So when you use a reward system, it tends to work quite well for children with ADHD. Or in a classroom situation, when you use what we call a group contingency, in other words, a group reward system, we're seeing particularly good results for children with ADHD, and that's encouraging. Another skill which is essential to use for children with ADHD is the daily report card system. Daily report card systems give children feedback about their behavior much more regularly. And research on children with ADHD has shown that children with ADHD need more feedback more often in order to manage with the demands of school life. So you can find out more about these skills on the website. But something I'll say to the teachers, we need to learn specific skills to address that very naughty child in your class. Even if it's not ADHD, there will be something that they're needing, some kind of support to do better. When we did research on nonviolent discipline skills, and you can find the paper that was published on that research on the Peace Discipline website, what we found was that these skills are not only good alternatives to hitting, they're not only skills that we should be using to prevent physical violence. These skills clearly have a lot of positive effects, and I found that really exciting. Long-term positive effects, children developing more self-control, children not getting into the bad stuff like drugs and alcohol or having sex too young, children doing better in school, children behaving better, children having better peer relationships, being less aggressive, children having a better connection with their parents and their teachers. There were so many positive effects of using nonviolent skills that we had to conclude in the paper that we should be using nonviolent skills not only as an alternative to physical punishment, because they work so well and have so many positive effects on children and long-term positive effects, in fact, that we should be using these skills because they're good for our children's development, not just because we need to stop hitting. I mentioned some alternatives to corporal punishment. There are definitely more. Like I say, if you want to find out more, you can have a look on our website, discipline.com. You will find a toolkit there with brief explanations of these nonviolent discipline tools and some examples of how to use them. You will also find research for those of you who are interested in going a little bit deeper on these skills. Just click on the research tab. So that's all for now. I hope you subscribe and press like if you found this video helpful. I'll be back soon with more in this series of what not to do and more suggestions of what we can do instead. Thanks for watching.